Yep.
Hello, young voters. I'm Sarah. This is Nico. We're reading Reform and Revolution, chapters 5 and 6, or just 5. Shit. Nico, want to begin?
Sure. So yeah, maybe this might be 5 and 6, maybe might be 5, depending on how long you go for. But yeah, so chapter 5, titled "The Consequences of Social Reformism and General Nature of Reformism," um, basically starts out with further criticizing of Bernstein, which is to be expected. Um, and she talks about the start, at least is well, that's where my notes start. Bernstein's advocacy results in the same policies as advocated for by social democrats. Is basically her shtick at the start there. Um, that is a criticism because she was anti-social democrat, in a sense because they um, the communists didn't really weren't happy with the social democrats, extremely unhappy with in fact calling them social fascists during when um, the fascists in Germany were trying to take power, because they often some or not often but sometimes even sided with the fascists over the socialists, I mean not the socialists, the communists, on certain issues, and by not supporting them entirely they are part of the enemy. So that would be her criticism there. Sorry, you have anything to say on that?
No.
Okay. Well, you just like give me a wave when you want to say something, I guess. Um, her next contention basically is that party politics, and she sort of talks about this a little bit throughout, but it seems to be a point where she really wants to hammer home. But party politics is useless to establishing socialism and is only useful to make the lives of workers better in the short term. Is her little thesis where she's saying party politics are fine, but they only will help short term and will never be able to establish socialism for reasons he established in previous chapters. So go watch our previous videos to understand that. I mean, I don't know why you'd be watching this as the first video. It seemed kind of hard to understand what's going on, but here we are. Is there anything on that? Um, she talks about how Bernstein argues that instead, um, she says she establishes that Bernstein argues that instead unions are instituting socialism in themselves. However, she disagrees on this topic tremendously. So, Sarah, take it. Go ahead.
Bernstein thinks of trade unions as like the gateway drug to socialism, like just kind of like seeing work in that light makes people want to become socialists, but our girl Rosa disagrees very much. She thinks trade unions don't really help in the socialist, plan or whatever.
Um, that's not the interpretation I got, but I suppose I see how you could get that. I thought what Rosa was saying, that she herself was saying that unions are the gateway drug, but Bernstein is saying that unions can directly achieve the establishment of socialism in it of themselves, and unions are a process of socialization. Uh, so they are socialism unions being. So that's what I got. But how'd you get that, Sarah? Or
I just took a direct quote from
okay.
Bernstein saying, well, I mean, I paraphrased the gateway drug part, obviously, but whatever.
Okay. Well, so she goes on, she says social democrats, and she previously tries to lump in Bernstein into that. So social democrats admit that trade unions and other stuff like them only create immediate relief for the working class, but they do prepare the proletariat for the eventual revolution. However, Bernstein believes that sorry, no, she doesn't lump in Bernstein to the Social Democrats. Never mind. However, Bernstein believes that trade unionism is the process of socialization, which is not true as laid out in the earlier chapters. Um, so that's what I got from it, more specifically. So it's interesting that she says, at least the her criticism seems to be that at least the social democrats are realistic and they understand what they're saying. Bernstein just has no idea what he's saying, and he's just, yeah, that's her criticism of him. So it's interesting that she's saying it that way. Um, So now she kind of divulges from unionism. So Sarah, do you have anything to say on the topic before we move on?
No.
Okay. So she says, the motions of capital and the motions of capitalist government are entirely separate, and influencing government has no effect on the capitalist system, is her sort of shtick. And that goes back to previous chapters where she talked about how trade unions can actually establish socialism because they only represent a limited portion of the capitalist system. Um, Although in earlier chapters, she kept talking about how the more power capitalists have, the more power they'll get into government and use government to change capitalism, and government and capitalism are intertwined. So I feel like this is sort of a contradiction on her part. And she doesn't really, either she doesn't explain this properly, I don't understand it, maybe I just don't understand it, but I feel like she doesn't really justify this point properly, especially considering the past couple chapters, I feel like. So Sarah, do you have any input on this point? Because I didn't understand it, or she seemed to be making a blunder here.
I don't think I understood it either, so I don't really want to say anything wrong.
Okay. All right, never mind. She does go back to trade unionism, basically rehashing what she said before. What she does add on here is that trade unions cannot institute revolution themselves, and to say so detracts from preparing for revolution. So, saying that unions will cause socialization, therefore we don't need to prepare for revolution, is detracting, from the ability for people to prepare for revolution, and therefore detracts from the establishment of socialism. Therefore, Bernstein is actually anti-socialist, even though he claims to be socialist. She's making the argument that Bernstein is not socialist, because he is trying to dissuade people or tell people that this eventual revolution is not necessarily going to happen. And Rosa evidently does believe that this revolution is going to happen and it should be prepared for. So she's calling out Bernstein there.
That directly against socialism if you just don't believe a revolution is going to happen?
Well, in her mindset, yes, because she thinks, yeah, there's going to be revolution, and if Bernstein is saying there's not going to be revolution and don't worry about preparing for it, then that kind of collapses. Yeah. I mean, not collapses, clashes. Her next point was, which I thought was interesting, is that she agrees with Bernstein that the more reforms you give people, the more they will ask for reform. Now, this is interesting because this is actually the opposite of critique I've seen from many socialists about social democracy, but and the antithesis of what she goes on to say. So I don't know, it's kind of weird, but she's saying it's the you give a mouse a cookie and I'll ask for a glass of milk situation with social reforms. So Sarah, do you kind of agree with that? Do you think if you give people more reforms, they're going to ask for more, or?
Yeah, I think people are really greedy. They're going to want to get as much reform and the best ability for themselves as possible. Do you not agree with it? It seems like you don't.
Well, I don't know. I'm not too sure. I've heard different arguments from different people. I've seen some left-leaning folks say, if we have the more reform we give people, the harder it is going to be to have revolution, because obviously revolution is not a very easy thing to do, and it requires a fairly desperate populace to do revolution. So if a lot of people say, we're probably not going to have, if there was to be a revolution, it's not going to be in it's probably not going to be in a first world country, especially the social democracies, because they have a lot there, and their gain from revolution, while pretty large if it's successful, there's also a whole lot to lose. Whether in the countries with less to lose, maybe a revolution is more likely. So I don't know. I feel like that makes sense, but I'm not really pro revolution, so I don't care. um, so, but I mean, I also agree that if you do some sort of reform, people are going to ask for more reform. But I don't think they will necessarily ask for revolution when there's no more reform to give.
Well, I mean, I think there's always more reform to give. I think that's the point. I don't think what she's saying is that like the end of the road. At some point, they're gonna want revolution, even if they have the cookies and the glass of milk and everything else. Like, I think she's just saying like no matter what, like reform is just gonna keep going. It's never gonna have like an end, but revolution like would.
Um, is that what you believe? Like, do you think people like continuously ask for reform?
Definitely. Like unless you get like a utopian society, there's always going to be someone who's not having fun.
Okay, but like eventually, if you ask for too much reform, wouldn't you sort of cause the capitalist collapse?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, I think even after that, people are still going to want different things. Like they're still going to want more.
Okay, but like if you can ask for enough reforms to cause like say like everybody gets a UBI of like something unreasonable, like everybody gets $100,000 a month, that's just not possible. So um that would cause the collapse of profit margins in capitalism in itself. So if you believe that would happen, do you, I guess, aren't you agreeing with Bernstein that you can reform into some sort of socialism or some sort of like reformist revolution where you overthrow capitalism through reform?
I mean, I get not really overthrow. I don't. I guess just like what I'm saying really is that like even in socialism, people are still gonna want things that they don't have, and reform is still gonna, I feel like, still happen, even if you know some people are like happy because it's a socialist society. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really have a position either way on this topic. I can't really wrap my head around which one because I'm seeing a variety of conclusions that you can gather for this, but like I think it's interesting to say that there's always going to be problems and always going to be reforms to be instituted even under socialism or with this extended communism, Sarah.
Mm.
Okay, so like on the most final form of communism, a lot of Marxists, or not all Marxists because there's a lot of denominations, but a lot of them might believe, at least to my knowledge, that do you understand the concept of postmodernism, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. So like a lot of them would be not postmodernist because they believe in like the eventual revolution that must happen and then the eventual establishment of communism that must happen, and then it will be done after that. That will be the end of history there. So
Well, I guess like I don't know, the way I'm thinking it is just kind of like when the communist state begins, there's going to be people who remember the capitalist state, and they're going to remember, hey, you can like have more money than other people, and then people are going to get more greedy, and things will erupt. I don't like unless we're like 100 years into a communist state and everyone just forgot that capitalism exists and they don't even care anymore. I think people are just inherently greedy and they're going to want more. Therefore, they'll want reform because they're happy.
interesting. But can't you? Yeah, I'll digress on that point because I don't want to make this video too long. So, all right, I have two more notes for chapter 5. Sorry. So, Sarah, if you want to sneak anything in, um, so my next note is she sort of makes a slippery slope argument, where she suggests that reform leads to political posturing and movements for only the sake of reform and not the establishment of socialism, and therefore a capitalist will move. A capitalist will more easily be able to win out in and the expectations of the reform movement can more easily be cut as a result of campaigning for reformism, which will lead to compromise of small reforms, and the socialist movement will lose steam as people forget the end goal and become increasingly complacent with the reformist system within a capitalist framework, which, as she says, cannot last for long. So, do you sort of agree with that? Do you think if there's too much focus on reform, do you think a socialist movement will lose steam and not do revolution?
I mean, yeah, because like people will kind of, yeah, like you said, be complacent. Like they'll just be like chill with the situation. Like if you get like a $15 minimum wage, people will stop caring about a $20 minimum wage. Like they won't be like fired up anymore.
And even a $20 minimum wage wouldn't be it either. It would be
Because they'd be like, well, we have 15, it's fine. At least it wasn't 7 anymore, Like if we were at like a $4 minimum wage, then people are gonna get angry. People are gonna start doing something, but they're gonna start like chilling out with the more reforms you make. I think you need to be at like the bottom of the barrel to have a revolution. Because if you're not, then there's gonna be so many people who are just like, well, I'm middle class and I'm fine. Like I'm living and it's chill. And then most people will care.
Yeah, I think I agree. Which is the reason, like, if you're against revolution, then we need to, I think the capitalists in themselves, it's in their interest to do reform, if they want to prevent revolution, but they won't, because that would cut into profit margins. So it won't happen from them. So my final note for chapter 5. So if Sarah, if you want to add anything after this, in effect, reformism is actually advocacy for capitalism, as reformism will make capitalism better and try and prevent it from its inevitable contradictions, versus expecting and planning for a revolution, and therefore it is pro-capitalist and anti-communist because it tries to fix capitalism and make the situation better for workers, instead of advocating for the revolution and overthrowing of capitalism. I think this is a take that I am particularly wary of, because this sounds a lot like accelerationism. Sarah, are you familiar? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. This sounds a lot like accelerationism to me, and I usually don't agree with that.
I don't necessarily think it's true. Like, do all reforms, inherently like go with capitalism? Like they're not going against capitalism. Like what if we, vote in socialists and create reforms that go against capitalism? Like, do you think that's what she said was true?
Okay, I think she is trying too hard to go against Bernstein, and in effect loses part of her convictions in this chapter. She says, if you're trying to make capitalism better, then that's anti-socialist. But at the start of the chapter, she said, we should have workers' movements and engage in electoralism to make workers' lives better. And then now she's saying, but when Bernstein does it, it's bad because it's anti-capitalist. I'm sorry, it's anti-socialist, because you're passing these reform measures that make capitalism better. And also if when you pass reform, it makes it harder for revolution, which is the opposite of her give a mouse a cookie thing. And she believes that revolution is inevitable. So if it's inevitable, I mean, it shouldn't matter how much you fix capitalism if you think it's going to collapse no matter what. It's going to happen. I mean, maybe she could have said it's going to prolong the extent to like the end of it's going to prolong collapse. It's going to take longer for collapse if you pass these reforms. But like, I don't know. She's just saying we need to get to a capitalist collapse as fast as possible, and we need to like constantly be preparing for it, versus passing reforms.
Yeah, she's doing less of like a critique on Bernstein and more of like a persuasion to like the audience, like that revolution's the way to go. And kind of annoying because she's just denouncing everything Bernstein says, but then contradicting herself in the meantime. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think she becomes overzealous in her criticism of Bernstein, and I don't know. I think she's losing sight of what her convictions are here. but maybe I'm just not understanding it, which is
That's
always
always
an
a
option.
possibility.
All right. So that's all I had for chapter 5. If you want to say any.
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. All right. Chapter 6, I only have 2 notes on this. So Sarah, if you want to start out.
This is just like a critique of Bernstein and her just throwing him down and like destroying his statistics and basically just like discrediting him as like a good source, I guess. And it's just annoying and boring and I don't like it at all. It's just like the same thing as chapter 5 when she's just kind of like Bernstein's wrong because of this, this, and this, and it's like, okay, like great, but like he still wrote this whole book and he's at least a little bit credible. Like, I don't know. She's just trying to discredit him to make everything he says seem false. And like I'd rather just have her like, critique him and like point out the wrong things instead of being like your stats are incorrect.
I think that's what she's doing here. Like she's critiquing him. I just think it's in a way that doesn't apply to us in really any way.
Yeah.
This is 1800s arguments that just don't apply to our modern day society. And Sarah, as we discussed earlier, that's sort of a problem with theory. There's some stuff that does apply, and there's some stuff that just does not at all. And yeah, we need to be wary of that when reading theory. Yeah. I also don't see. Sorry. Also in this sort of criticism here is that sorry. Let me just restate this. So yeah, she puts down his arguments and she argues against him by saying, he doesn't believe that socialism will be instituted through revolution. Yeah, because she believes that socialism will inevitably arise out of a democratic society. Shoot, okay. I wrote down this thing and I thought it had good meaning, but now I don't understand what I meant by it. So, Sarah, do you have anything to say while I try and figure this out?
Let me try to read my notes. I don't know, like it's just me being like, she's being annoying. That's like all my notes are. Like Bernstein is talking about the stats for like shareholding society and she just announces them. He talks about Marxist tendencies and it's just really, she talks about like Germany at one point and she's like Bernstein starts talking about like the economy of Germany, but she's like that doesn't work in this conversation because this happened right afterwards. Like she's just throwing history at us and it's annoying.
Yeah. I think that's just a mark of like, when it was written. She was trying to disprove and discredit Bernstein to the general audience at the time, like the general like party leaders and stuff. So yeah, she kind of had to do that. But okay, so my point was that she criticizes him for saying that he believes that socialism will not be instituted through revolution. At least that will not be the reason why it is instituted, but because out of necessity, that socialism will arise in a social democratic society. Like she criticizes him for saying socialism must necessarily be applied eventually. I don't see how this is in line with a famous quote that she made. I forget if it was after or before this work, but I think it was before it. Because I looked up the date to make sure. But she says she has a quote about it is either socialism or barbarism. So she's sort of saying like socialism must necessarily arise, otherwise we will turn to barbarism. So it feels like she's criticizing him and not thinking about the stuff that she said before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just goes back to her like overzealous criticism of it. of him. All right. Do you have anything else before I put my final note on this chapter?
No, I read all my notes.
Okay. Her last thing, I'll just read the passage. Bernstein does not see in the economic structure of capitalism the development that leads to socialism, but in order to conserve his socialist program, at least in form, he is obliged to take refuge in an idealist construction placed outside of all economic development. He is obliged to transform socialism itself from a definite historical phase of social development into an abstract principle. That is why the operative principle, the meager decantation of socialism by which Bernstein wishes to garnish capitalist economy, appears as a concession made not to the future the socialist future of society, but to Bernstein's own socialist past. I find this quite interesting because it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, Sarah. The idea of many Marxists being against the idea of postmodernism, where Bernstein, instead of saying socialism is a thing that is going to happen, there's going to be a revolution because of the necessary contradictions of capitalism, to saying into Bernstein basically saying socialism is a sort of concept that might happen, might not happen. Yeah, that
Like anyone who's like, advocating for something, why would they also denounce it saying it's abstract and it might not happen? I don't get that. It's just weird.
Well, I mean, I guess that's what we're seeing from Rosa. Like that's what Rosa is saying about what he's saying. So
Okay. So that's okay.
I'm sure it makes sense in his head. Obviously, nobody really argues for something they don't believe in unless they're being paid to, and I'm sure Bernstein was not being paid to do so.
I
Yeah,
actually have another thing. Well,
okay.
At like the end of that chapter, Rosa says that Bernstein thinks that Marxism is an invention, and she just goes on a tangent about how it's a discovery and how Marxism is like so incredible. Do you think it's an invention or a discovery?
I'm still trying to formulate my opinion on it and the implications of that opinion. And this is actually sort of a central point because a lot of Marxists will tell you Marx simply looked at capitalism and analyzed the problems with it and look through, and that's where we get the concept of scientific socialism. He scientifically looked through and explained the inefficiencies of it. So yeah, it was like a discovery. It was a discovery of political thought is what they believe versus a fabrication of Marx's mind. So yeah, that's a thing I'm sort of going back and forth on. I guess
Like I had like it's like socialism, like it wouldn't have been discovered if it wasn't for capitalism. So if capitalism didn't exist in the perfect world, like would Marxism exist? It just wouldn't, right? Or would Marxism be like what? Just like the everyday,
Huh. That is a fantastic question. Shoot.
I guess like it's hard to answer because it's a what if, and like
Yeah,
the world we live in, like deal with it. Don't try and find a new.
I don't know what I would say, but I know maybe a Marxist might say, well, look at the societies before general like history and stuff like that, like the not the caveman times, but like post the
Like native.
agricultural revolution, like they lived in these societies that were a lot like communes where they didn't have money and etc. So that I guess would be what the Marxists might say, but I have no idea.
Me neither. But like when I read that, that's what I thought. I didn't really think like of it as a discovery through capitalism. I just thought of it as like in general a discovery. So that's why I asked that question. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would. Okay. I'm not sure if this is like the view of the entire left, but I saw a leftist YouTuber say, you don't necessarily have to read theory to understand socialism a little bit, but you don't necessarily have to read theory to understand why capitalism is bad. You should, like he advocated, you said, you should read theory to better understand it, but you don't necessarily have to read Marx to come up with the ideas that Marx had. And he, a lot, I guess lefties would advocate, saying these ideas are inevitable and clear to anyone who puts their mind to it. So in that sense, yeah, like what I said before, like lefties would say it's a discovery versus an invention.
But like once again, you can only discover that if you're like in the capitalist society and you're seeing all the bad things. We'll have to maybe I'll do some research and like look at different societies before capitalism. If
I mean, the implication of it being an invention would be, this is just a thing that Marx came up with, and a lot of people follow his ideas. Versus this is like an innate thing that, is a thing that can be proven. That would be more of a discovery.
Multiple people can make an invention. Like I bet multiple people have had the same idea for an invention. Like if it's like a simple enough idea, then theoretically it's not. You couldn't discover it. You could just like think it up yourself, I guess.
Well, capitalism was an invention. Fascism was an invention. These were ideas thought up by specific people, not necessarily innate, but maybe like power structures were not an invention, and those are natural, I guess.
Do you think power structures are natural?
Yes, they're natural to form. It wasn't like some guy thought, okay, what if I was the king? He just became king out of his will. So I guess the way you would place communism in that or socialism would be that this was a discovery. This was a philosophical discovery based off of looking at what society was like and thinking, here are the problems with the society. But I don't necessarily know if socialism is a discovery or an invention. But I know that
we're talking Marxism.
Well, yeah, I don't know if Marxism is necessarily an invention or necessarily a discovery, but maybe anti-capitalism might be a discovery.
But you can only be anti-capitalist if capitalism exists.
Yes.
If it exists, then you can't discover it.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Then it would have to be invented.
Mm-hmm. So, like, if an alien researcher came down to Earth.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
if an alien researcher came down to Earth and there wasn't capitalism, then he couldn't discover anti-capitalism.
Yeah.
Well, that's a question for you commenters. Was it discovery or an invention or neither of the two? All right. Well, that's all I had for these two chapters. Sarah, anything?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully it was shorter than last time. I think it's about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So yeah, without further delay, I'm probably going to end it here. So, all right. Thank you, young voters, for watching, and make sure to subscribe and like and comment and click the links and check out our website, check out Sarah's page and check out my page and check out Sarah's playlist and my playlist and this playlist on the thing and just everything. Just do everything.
Do the thing, please.
Do everything we say for the rest of time. And if you don't, you're wrong.
Sorry. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everybody.